Grant Archer was halfway through his tirade when his mother picked up the mic. "You forged my name, stole from my home, and called me senile," Lillian said, voice calm but cutting. The crowd at the gallery froze. Grant's smirk cracked. "Security," she said, "please escort my son off the premises." Gasps rippled like thunder, and just like that, the war between mother and son over Richard Archer's legacy went nuclear. Wait, before we go any further, I've got to ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The earth was still loose where Richard Archer had been laid to rest, the sod not yet tamped down, when Grant adjusted the cuff of his blazer, glanced at his Rolex, and said, "I've got dinner plans." Lillian Archer didn't move. Her gloved hands gripped the handle of her husband's casket bouquet, white lilies, Richard's favorite, and her mouth remained set in a tight, gracious line. Her son's voice, clipped and polished like his suit, echoed louder than the minister's final prayer had moments earlier. "Clients flying in from Atlanta," Grant added with a rehearsed sigh. Timing couldn't be helped. Lillian turned toward him slowly, as if unwilling to let the weight of the day be jolted forward so quickly. She looked at her son, her only child, and saw not grief, not even discomfort, but impatience masked in courtesy. He leaned in, kissed her cheek, and whispered, "We'll catch up soon. Promise." And then he walked off, his polished shoes crunching over the gravel path, the scent of his cologne lingering longer than his presence. The crowd had already thinned. Only a few of Richard's old colleagues lingered at the edge of the grass, murmuring farewells, brushing crumbs of dirt from their dress shoes. The sun dipped behind a grove of low-hung oaks, the Charleston air heavy with humidity and the faint brine of nearby marsh. Lillian stood motionless beside the grave. The wind lifted the hem of her black wool coat. The silence, once sacred, now pressed. She didn't cry. She hadn't. Not yet. A soft voice broke the quiet. "You okay?" It was Beverly Huxley, Richard's longtime lawyer and friend. She stood a respectful few steps back, her silver hair neatly tucked into a low twist, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. Lillian inhaled slowly. "Ask me over dinner tonight." They chose a quiet booth at La Rousse, a tucked-away French restaurant where the soft clink of glassware and muted jazz cushioned the corners of silence. Lillian stared at the untouched glass of wine in front of her, hands still folded neatly in her lap. Beverly watched her with the kind of patience only years of legal negotiations and human heartbreak could teach. "I haven't eaten since, well, Richard's last night at the hospital," Lillian finally said, her voice low. "Then tonight we fix that," Beverly said gently. She nodded to the waiter, who returned with a small bowl of butternut bisque and warm sourdough. Lillian took a spoonful, tasting it as though food was an ancient language she was relearning. Her eyes welled, not from grief, but the simple relief of being nurtured again. She dabbed her napkin to the corner of her mouth, then set the spoon down. "He was gone before I could say goodbye, just gone," she whispered. Beverly didn't offer comfort. She offered something sharper. "Grant's behavior today, that didn't sit right." Lillian looked up, her lips pulling into a tight smile. "It didn't sit at all. He barely stood still long enough to acknowledge the casket." "He's executive of your estate, isn't he?" Beverly asked carefully. "He is," Lillian said. She sipped the soup again, then nodded to herself, as if that detail had just soured the flavor. Beverly leaned in slightly. "Ever think about changing your will?" Lillian's eyes lifted to meet hers. Outside the window, the wind brushed magnolia leaves against the glass in a slow, rhythmic scratch. Inside, Lillian reached into her purse and pulled out a folded linen napkin. On it, she had written, absently perhaps, names. Not Grant's. Not anymore. She slid it across the table to Beverly. "I think I just did." The soup bowls had gone cold by the time the grandfather clock in the foyer struck 9. Lillian Archer sat alone at the head of her long oak dining table, one hand resting on the silver place setting, polished, precise, pointless. She'd laid it out anyway. Grant's favorite china, the crystal water glass he'd always tilted just so. The seat remained empty, pristine as a showroom. Not even the courtesy of a call. Outside, the Charleston night had settled in, thick and warm, the windows sweating gently under the pressure of humid air. Inside, the silence clung like damp linen, interrupted only by the occasional groan of the floorboards above or the faint hum of the refrigerator trying too hard. Lillian rose slowly, her joints stiff from both grief and time, and gathered the dishes. She scraped untouched food into the trash, each clatter of stainless steel against ceramic louder than she expected. The quiet didn't break, it deepened. She poured herself a glass of wine, one of the bottles Richard had kept for special dinners. The cork had disintegrated, dry from years of neglect. It tasted sharp and thin, but she drank it anyway. Then she wandered room to room, as if searching for something she'd misplaced. The living room was still cluttered with framed moments, Grant's kindergarten art projects, Richard's bronze retirement plaque from the university, a family portrait taken when Grant was 12 and still smiled like he meant it. Lillian paused there, fingertips brushing the glass of the frame. Her eyes lingered on Richard's face, his hand resting gently on her shoulder in the photo. She remembered the warmth of that touch. It had faded long before he did. The house felt bigger now, or maybe it was just more hollow. She moved down the hallway toward the study. The scent of old paper and lemon oil hit her the moment she opened the door. It still smelled like Richard, like thought and order. A single brass lamp cast golden pools across the built-in shelves, illuminating the locked safe tucked behind a sliding portrait of an autumn landscape. She knelt carefully, pressed her palm to the keypad, and entered the code. The door clicked open. Inside, nestled among insurance forms and bond certificates, was the Archer estate binder. Heavy, too heavy. She carried it to the desk and opened it flat. Every tab, every sheet, every notarized clause screamed one name in bold ink: Grant Malcolm Archer. Sole beneficiary of the house, the liquid assets, the art collection, every last curated piece, some with Richard's personal notes still taped to the back. Everything. Lillian didn't cry. She didn't frown. Her hand simply moved to the corner of the page, flipped it carefully, and read the next line. Per Grant's recommendation, all assets consolidated under a single beneficiary for streamlined succession. She remembered that conversation now, months ago. Grant had stood in this very room, all charm and numbers and spreadsheets. "It's just efficiency, Mom. Less paperwork, less stress. Trust me." And Richard had trusted him, had patted his shoulder and called him sharp. That word echoed now, jagged and cutting. She reached into the drawer, pulled out her phone, and tapped into old voicemails. She scrolled past a dozen system messages until she found it, one from Richard dated almost a year back. "Leal, if I ever go before you, don't let him hustle you. He's my son, but he's got his own compass. Keep yours steady." Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she pressed play again and again. 10 minutes later, Lillian was on the phone. "Beverly," she said, voice steady as stone, "I'm ready to redraw the lines." The next morning, she returned to the study with a shredder. She fed the estate pages in slowly, one by one. The hum of the machine rose and fell like breath. Names turned to ribbons, signatures to dust. When she reached the last page, the one labeled Final Directive, she paused. Then she smiled, just slightly, and slid it through. Grant invited her to a check-in brunch. The restaurant was too loud, not with volume but with effort. The clink of mimosa flutes, the scrape of chairs on tile, the rising cadence of laughter, all felt performative, like everyone was pretending a normal Sunday had arrived. Lillian Archer sat stiff-backed at the edge of a velvet banquette at Penrose and Ivy, the kind of brunch spot with chandeliers made of repurposed oyster cages and waiters in chambray shirts. Grant arrived 7 minutes late, not enough to offend, just enough to establish pace. "Mom," he said, pressing a kiss to her cheek with the choreography of a diplomat, "you look better, stronger." "I had soup last night," she said softly. "A miracle." He laughed like she'd told a joke. It echoed too long. Lillian picked up her coffee and stirred it twice, though the cream had already dissolved. "Honestly, I've been worried," he said after the funeral. "You seemed a little unmoved, but you've still got that backbone, Archer women, tough as Carolina pine." Lillian let him speak, nodding now and then, watching the way he sliced his French toast with surgical precision. His cufflinks glinted each time he lifted his fork, the same ones Richard had given him. "Speaking of legacy," he began, dabbing his mouth with a monogrammed napkin, "I've been thinking." He paused as if for drama. "It might be smart to give me early access to the trust. Nothing drastic, just to start some strategic investment. Let the money work smarter, you know." Lillian's spoon paused mid-stir. "Strategic?" she echoed. He leaned forward, earnest eyes, teeth too white. "Exactly. Charleston's about to pop again, new development corridor by the river. I've got the contacts, the zoning maps. With just a little capital, I can turn that into real generational wealth." "I see." She placed the spoon down slowly, carefully aligning it with her saucer. "I mean, it's not just about me," he added quickly. "It's about preserving what Dad built. Making sure your name, our name, means something 50 years from now. Lillian glanced around. A woman across the room was peeling an orange slice off her mimosa rim with her teeth. Someone else dropped a fork. She let the chaos cradle her while she reached for her phone beneath the tablecloth. Her fingers moved with purpose. Text to Beverly Huxley. Message, ASAP, meeting. He's circling. Grant kept going, the way men do when they think silence means agreement. I've even got projections, like real ones. He pulled out his tablet, swiped a few times, and turned the screen toward her. Look at these margins. By Q4, we're looking at... She raised a hand, palm gentle but final. I'll think about it, Grant. He blinked, surprised, then smiled like a man who thought he'd already won. Of course, no rush, just sooner's better in these markets. Later that day, Lillian stood alone in her study, dusk bleeding in through the gauzy curtains. She moved toward a small chest under the window seat, one Richard had built with his own hands during their first spring in the house. She opened it, reaching past old quilts and piano sheet music, until her hand found a pale blue envelope. Inside was a birthday card from Grant. No message, no inked signature, just a Hallmark verse and a printed label stuck across the bottom. Love, Grant. It might as well have been a barcode. Her chest tightened, not with sadness, but resolve. The memory of his fake warmth that morning collided with the clinical detachment of that card. She walked to her desk, opened the new trust file Beverly had dropped off 2 days prior. Her pen hovered, then moved. She didn't write Grant Archer. Instead, she printed in firm block letters, "The Charleston Women's Fund, in memory of Richard D. Archer." She sealed the document in a fireproof envelope, slipped it into the safe, and locked it with a final click. The first thing she noticed was the shadow on the wallpaper, an outline of what should have been there, like a phantom limb. The sun had bleached the wall around it, leaving a perfect rectangle where Richard's Low Country morning print once hung. The frame had been a gift from their 20th anniversary trip to Hilton Head. Lillian stood motionless in the hall, her breath shallow. The painting wasn't just gone, it had been removed. She scanned the console table below it, now oddly bare. Her fingers moved to the nearby display cabinet where silver photo frames once stood beside a velvet ring box that held her mother's antique sapphire brooch. She opened the case. Empty. Lillian's heartbeat slowed, not from panic, but from something colder. Realization. Her eyes moved across the room like a scanner, counting, calculating, remembering what had once belonged there. The room felt gutted in a way no funeral could touch. She walked to the kitchen, phone already in hand. Her thumb hovered over Grant's contact. She stared at it for a long moment, then pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice breezy. "Hey, Mom, you get my text?" "I noticed a few things missing," she said, her voice precise. "Your father's print, my brooch. Who authorized that?" Grant didn't miss a beat. "I stopped by yesterday, just grabbed a couple keepsakes. Thought it'd be better to get them before, things get redistributed. They weren't yours to take. They will be. I'm just pre-sorting, keeping them safe in my condo downtown. Don't worry, they're fine there." There was a silence on her end, a long one. Then, "That's theft in a necktie," she muttered and hung up. She didn't give herself time to cry, not now. Instead, she made a call to Beverly, who picked up immediately. "I need to itemize everything, every fork, frame, and piece of art," Lillian said. "And I want documentation, photographic, notarized, whatever it takes." "You want to inventory the estate?" Beverly asked carefully. "No," Lillian replied. "I want to protect it." By mid-afternoon, Beverly arrived with her paralegal, a digital recorder, and a checklist template. Lillian moved through the house like a curator in a private museum, photo after photo, room by room. In the upstairs study, she found an envelope of negatives from Richard's early photography years. In the linen closet, she unfolded her great-aunt's hand-stitched quilt, cataloging the smell of cedar and lavender sachets. Everything was now part of a record. In the art room, she stopped in front of a small oil painting. "My own," she said quietly, "especially those." By dusk, her fingers ached, her voice too, but the work was done. That night, over coffee and old records, Lillian sat with Beverly reviewing options. They circled one line in the legal packet 3 times: transfer of physical estate assets into a charitable trust. The foundation they selected, the Carolina Arts Preservation Fund. She tapped her pen once on the page. "Make it irrevocable. I want him legally boxed out of every item down to the piano bench." "I can have it filed by Friday," Beverly said. But Friday came early. The next morning, a black SUV idled in the driveway. Two movers in branded polos stood beside the tailgate, stretching gloved hands. Grant emerged from the passenger side, sunglasses on, smile weaponized. Thought I'd help with consolidating some of the larger pieces, he said, gesturing at the house like a tour guide. Don't worry, I brought a crew. Lillian opened the front door but didn't step aside. Her voice was dry as sea wind. Mom, Grant said, placing a hand on the doorframe like he owned it. We talked about... No, she cut in, stepping forward. You talked. I listened. And now I've acted. He tilted his head, something calculating behind his grin. Are you sure this is the hill you want to die on? Lillian smiled. No, this is the one I want you off of. She closed the door, locked it, turned the deadbolt with the kind of finality that echoes down bloodlines. Then she walked to the kitchen, calm and certain, and dialed the non-emergency police line. How can I help you? Yes, she said. I'd like to report unauthorized movers on private property. The papers lay between the salt cellar and the wine glass, thick, crisp, legally lethal. Lillian didn't touch them. She just stared across the candlelit table at Beverly Huxley, whose eyes were sharp behind gold-rimmed readers. The waiter approached with a menu, but Beverly waved him off gently. Just wine and time, she said. Lillian nodded. Justice. Medium rare. They sat in the corner booth at the Palmetto House, the same restaurant where Lillian and Richard had celebrated their retirement. Same blue velvet walls, same cut-glass votives. But tonight she wasn't here to toast the past. She was here to excise it. Beverly pulled out her fountain pen, uncapped it with precision, and slid the cease and desist letter across the table. This officially bars Grant from entering your property without written consent, she said. Backed by the new trust, it's enforceable immediately. Lillian glanced at the embossed legal header, her eyes pausing on the words managed estate. Then she reached for the pen. Let's cut the cord, she murmured, and signed. Step 1, Beverly said, setting the signed letter aside and reaching for another folder. Now we begin the property conversion. Your home will no longer be a private asset. It becomes a trust-owned residence under preservation status, which means... He can't touch it, Lillian finished. Beverly smiled. Not even with gloves. The wine arrived, dark red, full-bodied, smelling of plum and ash. Lillian took a long sip. He tried to move fast. I'll move faster. But Grant had already found out. By the time dessert was declined, Lillian's phone vibrated. She checked it. A text from Grant. Just heard about your little legal stunt. You'll regret this. We both will. Then another. I'll sue. You won't win. Lillian showed Beverly the screen. You've documented everything? Beverly asked. Screenshots, voicemails, and I kept the security footage from the movers. Good. Beverly reached into her briefcase and pulled out a formal harassment complaint draft. I took the liberty of getting this ready. All we need are your initials. Lillian reached for the pen again. Her hand didn't tremble. Outside, Charleston buzzed with early evening life, streetcar bells, cicada hum, distant jazz filtering through alleyways. But inside, it felt like a courtroom, and Lillian had already passed sentence. Let's file it first thing tomorrow, she said, before he can change his tactics. You're bleeding him slowly, Beverly said. Perfect pace. I'm not bleeding him, Lillian corrected. I'm making sure he never tastes inheritance again. They sat for a moment in quiet agreement. Then Beverly said, almost offhand, There's something else. I got a call this morning from the gallery. Lillian looked up. Dover House. They're launching a new memorial program, scholarships for emerging artists over 60. They want to name it after Richard. Lillian blinked, caught off guard by the warmth the suggestion stirred. That's fitting. They asked if you'd sponsor the first round. $10,000 covers 3 artists. Lillian didn't hesitate. Do the paperwork. That evening after the meal, Beverly and Lillian walked together to Dover House, its brick facade glowing amber under string lights. Inside, the office table was still the same one Lillian had once used to review artist portfolios. It was where Grant had sat cross-legged as a boy, playing with colored pencils while she arranged installations. She placed the contract flat on that same surface, signed, dated, funded. And in the margin she wrote in ink, "In memory of Richard Archer, legacy not lineage." She closed the folder just as the server from dinner appeared in the gallery's entrance, holding a slip. "Ma'am," he said, "I didn't want to interrupt earlier, but someone covered your check." Lillian frowned. Who? He shrugged. Said to tell you it was an anonymous gift, but left this. He handed her a napkin in familiar handwriting. Consider it repayment for what he doesn't deserve. No signature, but she knew. The envelope trembled slightly in Lillian's hands, not because of age or fragility, but because of what she already sensed was inside. The Bank of Charleston letterhead gleamed against the ivory paper like a sneer. She slid it open carefully, unfolding the document with a kind of dread that had weight to it. Her eyes scanned the mortgage application. Midway down the page, there it was, her signature, curved, deliberate. But she hadn't signed anything, her stomach hollowed out. The date, October 18th, exactly 5 days before Richard's stroke. The walls of her study closed in, and for a moment the soft ticking of the mantel clock became deafening. She walked to her desk in silence, set the paper down, and sank into the leather chair. The forged signature stared back like a fingerprint at a crime scene. She couldn't feel her hands. 10 minutes later, Beverly stood in the foyer, coat still on, folder already open. "He filed a refinance request on the property under your name," she said grimly. "The forged signature is almost passable, but look here," she pointed to the loop on the L in Lillian. "Your real signature hooks upward. This one loops downward. It's not yours." "And the date?" Lillian asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Same week Richard collapsed." Lillian turned away, her breath hitching. She held herself still for as long as she could. Then she broke. Her sob echoed against the wood-paneled walls, sudden and uncontrolled. Not the poised grief she'd managed at the funeral. This was a howl, swallowed into the crook of her elbow, raw and private. Beverly didn't move. She simply placed a hand on the back of the chair and let the silence fall around them. When Lillian finally looked up, her eyes were red but steady. "He was counting on me falling apart," she said, "or being too grief-struck to notice." Beverly leaned in gently. "We can take this to the police, Leal. This is felony-level fraud." Lillian shook her head. "No police, not yet." She inhaled slowly, straightened her blouse. "I want precision, not drama. I want every single legal door closed around him before he even knows he's trapped." Beverly's eyes sharpened. "Then we go scorched earth, quietly." They started that afternoon. The first step, retitling the house. Lillian opened a new irrevocable trust, independent of the previous estate structure. The house was placed into it retroactively, shielded from Grant's access attempts. A second filing transferred management rights to an independent fiduciary with no personal connection to either Archer. Then came the audit. Beverly initiated a full financial sweep of the Archer estate joint accounts, closed, trusts, investment portfolios, and any suspicious activity from the last 12 months. Lillian signed the release forms with a kind of sacred ritual, as though each pen stroke was a blessing to the truth. "He'll know we're digging," Beverly warned. "Let him squirm," Lillian said. "He gambled I'd be too broken to read the fine print. He forgot who taught him how to balance a checkbook." That evening, as golden light spilled across the floorboards of the foyer, Lillian stood by the door holding the final envelope. Inside, a legal notice prepared with exquisite clarity and zero loopholes. She wrote his name on it herself, Grant M. Archer, then walked it to the postbox by hand. The letter would arrive in 2 days. Inside it read, "Your access to this property is terminated effective immediately. All keys revoked, all privileges rescinded. Do not return." She returned home and set her tea to steep on the stove. The kettle hissed. In her study, the mantel clock ticked steadily. Outside, across town, Grant opened his email and found the scanned copy first. The first blow landed not in a courtroom but on a screen. Lillian's name, her full name, lit up on a local real estate gossip site, quoted directly from Grant's post. "It's been difficult watching my mother struggle mentally. I wish she'd let me help her, but others have filled her head with paranoia. She's not herself. This isn't how Dad wanted our family legacy to be handled." It spread faster than truth ever could, a polite, weaponized lie. Screenshots were shared, anonymous comments bloomed like fungus. "Sad to see dementia win again. Why is she suddenly donating everything? Sounds like elder abuse. Poor guy just trying to do right by his father's estate." Lillian stared at her phone from the breakfast table, unmoving. Her toast had gone cold. Outside, a crow landed on the garden fence and cawed once like a gavel. She turned off the screen. In the silence that followed, her eyes scanned the shelf above the fireplace. A small, worn leather notebook sat there, Richard's old poetry journal. She reached for it, fingertips brushing the spine like greeting an old friend. She hadn't opened it since before the funeral. She flipped to a marked page, a short poem, barely 12 lines, underlined in Richard's looping scrawl. "Dignity wears silence like silk. Not threadbare, not torn, not loud with need or thunder, but stitched in the hush between storms. She took a photo of the poem and uploaded it to her now quiet Facebook account with no caption. Then she deleted the app. Then she deleted Grant from her contacts, her emergency list, her phone favorites, every tether, one by one. By mid-afternoon, Beverly arrived with a manila envelope and a notary in tow. They sat in the sunroom, the azaleas brushing softly against the glass outside. The more he leans into the confused widow narrative, Beverly said, the more vital it becomes to legally establish you're of sound mind. Lillian nodded and reached for the pen. The affidavit was crisp, to the point, a signed witness statement affirming her mental clarity, testamentary capacity, and current legal decisions, all backed by recent medical documentation Beverly had quietly collected in preparation. "I'm more lucid now than I was the year Grant pitched that crypto investment dinner," she quipped. "Unfortunately," Beverly said dryly, "he's got money and followers. They don't need truth, just a headline." Lillian signed with steady hands. It didn't take long for another headline to reach her. Charleston Estates Weekly, Sun or Shark? Questions swirl around Archer real estate dealings. It came via email, the author a freelance journalist known for whisper trail stories. Lillian wasn't sure who had tipped them off until the call came. Blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. A young woman's voice hushed. "Mrs. Archer? Yes, I used to work for Grant. Look, I saw the post, the one where he implied you're unstable. That's exactly how he discredits anyone who challenges him. Investors, staff, family." Lillian sat straighter. "And you are?" "Call me Natalie. I'm not ready to go public yet, but I've got records, emails, voice memos. I kept receipts." Lillian's grip tightened on the phone. "He cornered me in a meeting room once," Natalie continued. "Said I'd never work in Charleston again if I questioned how he handled funds. He makes it personal, always." Lillian reached for a notepad. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw how he looked at you when you came to the office once, like you were a ghost. He doesn't fear you, but he should." The line clicked dead. Lillian stared at the space where the voice had been. Later that night, under a pool of lamplight in the den, she transcribed every word she remembered. The pen never paused. The notes ended with a name, Natalie Quinn. She underlined it once, then circled it. Lillian arrived at the gallery event sponsoring the Richard Archer Memorial Grant. Lillian Archer fastened the pearl clasp with fingers that didn't tremble, not anymore. The strand sat cold and elegant against her collarbone, a relic of vows that had once bound a different life. She looked into the mirror, smoothed the front of her black satin blouse, and whispered, "Let's show them how legacy looks in heels." The driver waited outside, engine low and steady. Charleston's twilight hung thick and golden, moths batting softly against the porch light. As she stepped into the evening, she climbed into the car without ceremony, clutching a small leather clutch in one hand, her spine straight as scripture. The gallery stood lit like a lantern, windows glowing against the cobbled street. Dover House had been her domain once. Now it bore Richard's name. A new brass plaque flanked the entrance. The Richard Archer Memorial Grant, in support of creative courage. Inside, the air buzzed with soft conversation and strings from a live quartet. Donors, alumni, old friends. They turned as she entered, and the room shifted. Applause rippled through the atrium. Beverly, already at the wine table, raised a glass in her direction. "You look like the settlement of an estate," Beverly said when Lillian joined her. "Final, polished, unshakable." "I feel like one," Lillian replied, letting a server place a glass of Pinot Noir in her hand. At the center of the gallery hung a photograph. Richard in his 30s, arms crossed in front of the original Dover House facade, sun in his eyes, stubborn pride in his smile. Below it, the inscription, "Legacy, not lineage." Lillian stood before it for a long moment. She remembered when that photo was taken. Grant had been a toddler napping in the car. Richard had joked, "Let's leave something behind besides juice stains and receipts." A hand brushed Lillian's shoulder. "Mrs. Archer, if you're ready, the remarks can begin." But the room began murmuring before she could move. A flash of tailored gray cut through the crowd. Grant. He was here. His jaw set, stride tight, eyes scanning the room like a man hunting for the podium he was not invited to. "Mother," he hissed, low but venomous. "What is this? You're parading around like this was yours to give away. Dad would never—" Lillian didn't blink. She turned to the nearest gallery employee and said calmly, "Please call security." "You can't be serious," Grant snapped. I'm as serious as forgery on a mortgage, she replied, loud enough for those nearby to hear. People began turning. Conversation dimmed. A few donors edged back. The string quartet paused mid-bar. Two security guards appeared, flanking Grant with practiced neutrality. Lillian leaned in, her voice low but the steel in it undeniable. Escort him, gently and firmly. Grant's voice rose, too loud, too late. This isn't over, Mother. You think you can rewrite history? She tilted her head. Not rewriting, just clarifying. As he was ushered out, the crowd remained frozen, watching him disappear through the double doors like a bad decision being finally evicted. Beverly clinked her wineglass once for silence. To legacy, she said, raising it high, and to finally living without leeches. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then blooming. Later, when the crowd thinned and the music softened, Lillian slipped into a side office to collect her coat. The room smelled of aged wood and lemon polish. An old wine box sat beside the chair, one Richard had kept tucked away behind the fireplace for years. She hadn't seen it since the early 2000s. Inside, beneath a bottle of vintage Cabernet, lay a folded piece of ivory stationery. Her breath caught. Richard's handwriting, looped, careful. She opened it slowly, the corners of the page cracking slightly with age. Protect what matters. Let go of what doesn't. If this finds you, it means you already have. She pressed the page to her lips, then folded it gently, tucking it into her clutch like a compass. The text alert glowed blue in the dark interior of the Uber as Lillian rode home from the gallery. New transaction attempted. Joint account ending in *243. Amount $17,400. Method wire transfer. Status flagged fraud suspicion. She stared at it, face stones still beneath her makeup, the pearls on her neck suddenly feeling like armor. No panic, just confirmation. The final attempt. By the time she stepped through the front door, the phone was already ringing. The Bank of Charleston's branch manager, Mr. Henley, sounded shaken. Mrs. Archer, I deeply apologize for the disturbance, he began. One of our fraud systems caught the attempt mid-process. It originated under a user ID tied to your late husband's credentials. Someone tried to wire the remaining joint funds to an out-of-state shell firm. I assume the account was supposed to be closed, Lillian said, voice low but taut. It should have been. You did all the necessary post-death verifications. This one, it slipped through a secondary archive file, but we've locked it now, completely frozen. Lillian exhaled, slow and sharp. Close it. I don't want that account to breathe another day. We'll expedite it. And again, Mrs. Archer, I'm sorry. She hung up without another word. In the silence of her study, Lillian placed the phone on the desk, fingers resting against the grain like she was grounding herself. The lamp cast a warm cone of light over the oak surface, illuminating stacks of labeled folders Beverly had helped her assemble, each one dated, signed, notarized. She opened the latest, Financial Timeline, Archer Estate. Beverly arrived the next morning in pressed slacks and a look that said, I already know. He tried to clean out Richard's old account, Lillian said before Beverly sat. He's getting desperate. We're cornering him. No, Lillian corrected, setting her teacup down with a deliberate clink. He's already in the trap. Now we make sure the rest of the world sees what he looks like when he chews through his own tail. Together, they drafted the final affidavit, a meticulous summary of every financial action taken since Richard's death. Transfers, filings, changes of ownership. Beverly read aloud each clause. Lillian initialed each page. No skipped lines, no room for questions. The next step came on its own. The journalist who'd first whispered about Grant's shady real estate dealings resurfaced, this time louder. She requested an interview. Lillian declined, but authorized public access to the filings through a carefully worded legal statement. No opinions, just facts. By Thursday morning, the headline ran, Local Woman Outsmarts Son in Quiet Estate War, Forgery, Fraud, and the Unraveling of Charleston's Archer Family. Beverly clipped the article from the Courier and handed it over like a trophy. Lillian scanned the first paragraph, then folded it in half and placed it inside Richard's old journal. He'd have hated the attention, she said with a smile, but he'd have loved the result. Beverly's gaze lingered. Leal, that account, $17,000, was that the last of it? Lillian looked up. No, she said, reaching into a drawer beneath the desk. She pulled out a slim envelope, yellowed and creased, addressed to her in Richard's hand. He told me once, always keep one thing Grant doesn't know exists. I thought he meant a boundary. Turns out he meant an account. She opened the envelope. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box and a statement summary. Bank of Beaufort, private account, opened 15 years ago. Sole beneficiary, Lillian M. Archer. Balance, $86,219.76. Beverly blinked. He really did think ahead. Lillian nodded. He left it in my name, no trail Grant could trace. What will you do with it? Lillian's answer came without hesitation. Fund the fight, quietly, and then use the rest to build something he'll never be welcome in. The brass key sat warm in Lillian's palm, faintly smudged with age. She hadn't touched it in months, hadn't needed to, not since the locks were changed, the doors sealed, and the intentions behind them dismantled. The guest apartment above the detached garage had once been built for Hope, for visits, for family, specifically for Grant. Now it echoed with nothing but breath and memory. She climbed the narrow staircase slowly, each step creaking in rhythm with her heartbeat. A shaft of light fell through the blinds, striping the hardwood floor like slatted armor. Dust motes danced in the quiet air. Inside it smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. The space was still tidy. The plaid armchair Richard had reupholstered, the framed sketches Grant had drawn as a child, the twin bed with a navy quilt Lillian had once fluffed before Christmases that never came. She moved room to room, touching little, not because she feared what she'd feel, but because she finally understood what had been lost. Not things, not furniture, expectation. A framed photograph stood on the side table, Grant at 11, gap-toothed, grinning in a baseball jersey, arms thrown around Richard. She lifted it, held it to her chest a moment, then gently set it face down. That afternoon she placed a call. Yes, she told the woman on the other end. The unit's private, fully furnished. It has its own entrance and utilities. I'd like it donated to your housing program. Senior candidates only. I'll cover the first year. The woman paused. You're sure? I'm done keeping rooms for people who never knock. 2 weeks later, the new tenant arrived. Maxine Williams came with one roller bag, a cardboard box, and a piano-shaped brooch pinned to her lavender sweater. Her bones moved like someone who'd carried too much too long, but her voice was steel-lined. I used to bake, she said as Lillian led her inside. Used to play too, upright Yamaha. My son sold it to cover his debts. Didn't even ask. Lillian didn't flinch. She gave Maxine the tour, then the key, then the fridge stocked with soup and greens and a covered plate of cornbread. Maxine touched the edge of the counter as if testing reality. Why would you do this? She asked softly. For a stranger? Lillian smiled, small and tired. Because you're not strange, just familiar. Later that evening, Lillian knocked lightly on Maxine's new door, offering a tray of warm cookies. Chocolate chip, her go-to when grief needed sugar. Maxine opened the door already wearing slippers, a jazz record playing softly behind her. They sat on the apartment's little sofa, the record scratching gently between notes. Outside, the wind swirled through moss-hung oaks. Inside, silence settled gently, not like absence, but like understanding. After a few bites and a sip of tea, Maxine asked, Did your son hurt you too? Lillian's eyes welled without warning, not because it was a new question, but because it was the first time someone had asked it without judgment. She looked down, then met Maxine's eyes. Not anymore. Maxine nodded once, sipped her tea, and leaned back into the music. They didn't speak again for a while. When Lillian finally returned to the main house, the night had grown thick. Porch light glowed against the dark, and cicadas murmured like old secrets in the garden. She climbed the stairs, stepped out of her shoes, and placed the empty cookie tray by the sink. Then her phone buzzed, a voice note from Grant. She pressed play. His voice crackled through static, frayed, clipped, angry. You think this ends with a scholarship and some pity rent? You'll regret this when you're gone. She stood motionless, not afraid, not even surprised, just sad for him. She deleted the message, no reply. The camera's red light blinked steady in the corner of the room. Lillian sat beneath it, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture as straight as a sermon. She wore a navy cardigan, hair pinned back, the pearls gone. The lighting was soft, natural, the afternoon sun bleeding through lace curtains. No theatrics, just truth. To those I raised, she began, her voice low, deliberate, and those who raised me by showing up when it mattered. She paused. I have no apologies to make and no debts to settle. What I have is a map made of memory, made of music, made of mistakes I do not regret. The video will was Beverly's suggestion, legal and personal. Let them see your face when you say it. And so Lillian did. She spoke of her journals, 4 leather-bound volumes filled with pressed flowers, ink stains, and Richard's napkin poems. She bequeathed them to the Charleston Public Library Special Collections. Her framed photos and letters would go to the Low Country Women's Archive, alongside oral histories of matriarchs who'd shaped towns without headlines. Her grandmother's brooch, recovered in a police report from Grant's movers, was earmarked for Maxine. I want the things I touch to land where they'll be held with care, not resold, not locked away. Scene. The recording ended with a long look into the lens. Her eyes softened but did not tremble. Don't let anyone tell you blood is thicker than backbone. Click. Later that evening, Maxine sat beside her on the piano bench, flipping through a stack of yellowed sheet music. These yours? Lillian nodded. Wrote most of them before I ever married. Stopped after Grant was born. Life got too loud. Maxine tapped the top page. Let's make them hurt again. They began with a nocturne, melancholy and spare. Maxine played the left hand, Lillian picked out the right. Together they stitched sound from silence. When Beverly arrived the next day, she found them still humming. You're haunting him alive, Beverly said with a wink. Lillian laughed, truly laughed for the first time in weeks. It filled the kitchen like cinnamon from a warm oven. That same afternoon, she pulled out a manila folder labeled Legacy Living and added a new page. Event proposal, Lillian Brooks Archer Living Memorial Salon. Date, to be determined. Location, Dover House Gallery. Program, readings, piano selections, memory wall, community archive booth. Theme, celebrate before the curtain falls. I want to hear my stories while I'm still breathing, she told Beverly, handing over the folder. No flowers after I'm ashes. I'll get it on the calendar, Beverly said, but I warn you, it's going to be standing room only. Maxine chimed in from the hall. If there's wine, I'll MC. Lillian grinned. Deal. Within 48 hours, the gallery RSVP list crossed 60 names, former students, artists, neighbors, a few names from distant states. Handwritten notes arrived in the mailbox daily, tucked with dried lavender, Polaroids, old letters. People remembered. People came back. One name, however, did not appear on the list. Not Grant, not even a proxy. Lillian stared at the spreadsheet and didn't feel rage, not even sorrow, just clarity. He was no longer a branch of her life. He was a knot she'd undone. She closed the laptop, stood up, and went to water the roses. Lillian hosted the event. Readings, piano, laughter, love. Dover House Gallery glowed under golden Edison bulbs strung like halos across the courtyard. The air buzzed with low jazz, clinking glasses, and the scent of late summer blooms, gardenias, roses, and night-blooming jasmine, all arranged in handmade pottery lining the walkway. Guests arrived in soft colors, no black in sight, no mourning, just stories. Inside, a long table stretched along the gallery wall, filled with canapes, chilled Prosecco, and stacks of handmade stationery. A sign above it read, "Leave a story, borrow a memory." At the center of the room, the piano gleamed under spotlight. Its bench was draped in lace and flanked by a photo of Richard, young, in suspenders, arm outstretched beside a small easel. Beneath it, the caption, "Legacy doesn't live in blood, it lives in art." Lillian stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a warmth she hadn't felt in years, not since before the estate turned into a battlefield, not since she believed inheritance had anything to do with love. Beverly arrived first, in a linen suit and slingback heels, holding a glass and a file folder. "No legal drama tonight," she said with a smirk. "Not unless the shrimp cocktails are weaponized," Lillian laughed. "The only thing getting served tonight is peace." By 7, the room was full. Old friends, gallery donors, and artists she'd mentored over the decades took seats on folding chairs and ottomans. Maxine stood by the wall-length window, cue cards in hand, wearing a lavender wrap dress that danced each time she moved. When the music softened, Lillian stepped up to the small podium at the front. "Tonight," she said, voice clear, "isn't a goodbye, it's a now. It's me choosing what I'll leave behind while I'm still here to see it bloom." Applause broke out, polite but genuine. Maxine went next, her voice a balm and a blade as she performed her original monologue. "What my son didn't take, he took the china, the keys, the bank account passwords. He took my silence and called it weakness, but he didn't take my laughter, or my recipes, or the way I hum when I sew." Lillian pressed a tissue to her mouth, not to stop tears, but to keep from sobbing into applause. As the program moved on, attendees read poems, played brief songs, told stories of Lillian's kindness, a saved job, a framed photo, a gallery submission no one else had taken seriously. By the memory board, Guests wrote down their favorite Lillianisms on pastel cards and pinned them beside family photos and childhood drawings Grant had long ago forgotten. One note read, "You taught me how to love my crooked lines." Another, "The first time I heard Chopin, it was through your living room window." At last, Lillian returned to the podium. The room fell still. "I wrote this the night Richard passed," she said, unfolding a worn piece of paper. Her hands didn't shake. "Dear Richard, you taught me to look at quiet things closely, how paint settles, how bread rises, how our lives were always more art than plan. We did good, I did better. And now I know what to do with the time I have left." She folded the letter, placed it in a ceramic urn near the piano, and turned toward the projector screen. Photos filled the wall, Richard in his garden, their wedding day under a weeping willow, Grant as a toddler with cake on his face, Lillian at her first gallery opening, Richard asleep in a chair, her head on his shoulder. The music swelled. Maxine's fingers moved across the keys, filling the room with a bittersweet lullaby. And then, applause. It began in ripples, then roared into a standing ovation. Outside, across the street, a car idled behind a veil of live oaks. The window cracked just enough to let sound escape. Inside, Grant sat alone, watching, listening. No one noticed. No one invited him in. But Lillian had saved her final move for the morning. She stepped into her study at dawn the next day and signed one last deed. A modest beach property Richard had purchased under her maiden name, a place they had kept secret, sacred. She sold it quietly, and with the proceeds she founded the Archer Creative Sanctuary, a residency program for elder artists who'd been silenced, displaced, or forgotten, 12 grants fully funded, no heirs required. The morning light angled through the bay windows just so, gentle, filtered, warm enough to gild the keys of the piano she hadn't touched in weeks. Lillian sat quietly before it, her hands resting in her lap, eyes closed. No audience, no announcement, just her. The phone perched on a stack of old cookbooks recorded in silence. She pressed the record button, then settled into position. Her fingers hovered, trembled, then dropped into motion, measured, graceful, precise. The piece was her own. Silence after betrayal. It began like memory, soft chords scattered like dried leaves, hesitant, familiar. Then came the shift, a low left-hand surge, minor chords that crept in like footsteps on an old stair. A brief dissonance resolved slowly like a wound refusing to close before it taught its lesson. Lillian played without blinking, her breathing synchronized to the rhythm. Outside, the wind rustled the gardenias. Inside, the past emptied itself into the room. When the final note faded into quiet, she let her hands fall to her sides. Her reflection in the glossy black of the piano was older than the woman she used to be, but not diminished. Just finished. She uploaded the video without tags or comments, just the title, "Silence After Betrayal, L. Brooks." No credits, no hashtags, no mention of her name change. It spread anyway. By the end of the week, it was being shared in grief forums, among divorce recovery groups, in emails passed from sister to sister with subject lines like, "This made me breathe again." She received one message, no greeting, no context, just a sentence. "I didn't know healing could sound like this." In Charleston, Grant's name faded fast. The lawsuit dissolved before it touched court, the public filings picked apart by columnists. The community, now protective of Lillian's name, her strength had become local folklore. Maxine, now permanently moved into her new assisted residence courtesy of the Archer Creative Sanctuary, sent her weekly voicemails, often beginning with, "Well, my favorite philanthropist." Lillian never corrected her. On a Friday in early fall, Beverly stopped by with sweet tea and good news. "The final audits came through. You're clear. The foundation's tax-exempt status is approved and all pending claims have expired." Lillian poured the tea into 2 crystal glasses. "So that's it?" Beverly lifted her glass. "That's it. You're not just a free woman. You're untouchable." They sat on the back porch, sun sinking over the marsh, cicadas buzzing as the shadows grew long. Silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. "Did I do it right?" Lillian asked. "You didn't just survive him," Beverly said. "You replaced him with grace." Lillian nodded, but her answer came later. She returned to the beach house one final time, not as owner, not as widow, just as herself. No one knew she was coming. She didn't tell Maxine or Beverly, or even the program director now managing the Archer Creative Sanctuary. She walked the path from the dunes barefoot, the sand still warm, wind stirring her linen hem. A group of older women painted at easels near the waterline. One younger artist sat alone beneath a driftwood arch, sketching furiously in charcoal. Her face was angular, intense. As Lillian passed, the girl looked up. "You're her," she said suddenly. "The donor. They won't say your name, but I know it. The keys were in that box because of you. I was living in my car." Lillian smiled, but said nothing. The girl stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You saved my life." There it was again, the echo of Richard's voice, faint but sure. "Protect what matters." Lillian turned toward the ocean, her breath deep, her feet sinking into the tide-washed sand. No need for titles, no need for applause. She walked on barefoot, leaving no footprints behind. The combination clicked softly under her fingers, right, right, pause, until the heavy door of the wall safe eased open with a reluctant sigh. It had been nearly a year since she'd opened it. The hinges creaked, but the contents inside remained untouched by time or dust. Lillian knelt slowly, knees aching slightly, and stared at what remained of a life once shared. A velvet ring box, Richard's monogrammed cufflinks, a rolled deed, the last untouched envelope, its edge slightly worn from her fingers brushing it. Without opening it until now, she reached in and lifted it, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It was sealed in thick parchment, her name written in Richard's handwriting, slightly slanted, always neat. No date, just her name. She hesitated, then tore it open with the same steadiness she'd used signing every document Grant had once weaponized. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. No legal language, no financial clauses, just Richard. "Leal, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you the truth before I left. I was scared to break what we had. Scared you'd love me less for hesitating. But you always deserved the full truth, and I always fell short of giving it. Do what I couldn't, choose peace, even if it looks like walking away. Even if it means closing the door on our own son, especially then. You were always the brave one." The paper trembled in her hands as she read the final line again and again. Her mouth parted, but no sound came, just a tear, then another. It wasn't rage, it wasn't despair, it was the sharp, quiet grief of release. She sat cross-legged on the rug in front of the open safe, the letter resting on her knees, her shoulders slackening for the first time in months. In the stillness of that room, she finally understood. Richard hadn't been blind to Grant. He had just been afraid to say it out loud, and now the silence between them wasn't hollow. It was closed, complete. Lillian reached into the safe again and pulled out a leather folder labeled Archer Trust Old Files. She carried it to the fireplace, lit a single match, and fed the papers one by one into the flame. Legal jargon turned to cinders, false signatures curled black. Page by page, she let the past unspool in smoke. When it was done, she opened a fireproof lockbox from the bookshelf, sleek, clean, lined with fresh folders, and slid her new documents inside. She labeled it in thick black ink, Legacy. She paused, tapped the lid once with her fingers, and closed it with a satisfying click. Later that afternoon, she walked the house slowly, deliberately, room by room, memory by memory. She touched the kitchen table where Grant had once built science projects, the hallway mirror Richard always adjusted when they left for dinner parties, the old record player where her first Chopin solo had warbled its way into the carpet. Each room whispered something, and this time she listened. By the time she reached the front parlor, the light outside had gone gold. Shadows stretched long across the hardwood floor like ribbon. Only one light remained on in the house, hers in the reading nook, the one with the creaky leather armchair and the dusty copy of Persuasion still face down on the cushion. She smiled. Then, through the open kitchen window, a voice drifted up from the garden. "Leal, it's dinner." Maxine's call was punctuated by the clatter of plates and the unmistakable scent of something roasting, garlic, rosemary, olive oil. Lillian turned toward the sound. Her body moved slowly, but not stiffly, the kind of tired that feels earned. She glanced once more at the fireplace, at the clean hearth, the scorched memory. Then she flicked off the last interior light, not out of habit, out of intention. She stepped into the doorway and called back, "Coming!" The brush trembled slightly in her fingers, but not from weakness, from something closer to reverence. In the quiet back room of Dover House Gallery, Lillian dipped the fine tip into a dab of charcoal black acrylic and pressed it to the corner of the canvas. A single practice stroke. Lillian Brooks. No hyphen, no Archer. She stepped back, lips pressed together in a half smile. Her maiden name looked unfamiliar and yet perfectly at home, not on a driver's license or legal form, but here, under the edge of a landscape filled with windswept dunes and seagrass painted from memory. Her memory. "You finally signed one," came Beverly's voice behind her. Lillian turned. Beverly stood in the doorway, holding a sleek plaque wrapped in navy tissue. "Before you get swarmed out there, thought you might want to see it first." She handed over the award. Charleston Cultural Preservation League, Lifetime Contribution to Southern Arts and Elder Empowerment, presented to Lillian Brooks. Lillian ran, her thumb across the engraving. "It's strange," she said. "I thought the moment I dropped the Archer name I'd feel untethered, and instead—" "Instead?" Beverly asked. "I feel like I'm signing something I started a long time ago. I just hadn't finished the painting yet." The award ceremony that night was more elegant than extravagant, low lighting, soft jazz, and a dining hall filled with people who knew her story but never dared to ask her to relive it. The gallery had hung a dozen of her early sketches alongside archival prints of her community grant winners. Beneath each one, the same name marked in fresh, looping paint, Brooks. She accepted the award with a quiet smile, her pearl earrings glinting under the spotlight. When asked to say a few words, she spoke plainly. "I don't think legacy is what we leave behind," she said. "I think it's who we walk forward with and who we walk away from." No one mentioned Grant. By then, he had faded from Charleston entirely. No court filings, no countersuits, no contact. Not in court, not in conversation, not even in memory. The Archer Creative Sanctuary bloomed without him. 12 new recipients, senior artists with nowhere to go, each one funded for a year of housing, mentorship, and public exhibition. The website listed bios filled with phrases like reclaimed voice, found late courage, and painting at 76 like I was 26. Lillian watched from a distance, not to control it, but to marvel. On a warm night in early spring, she and Beverly visited the Preservation Lounge, a hidden jazz club tucked beneath a former carriage house downtown. The space hummed with saxophone and conversation, cocktail glasses fogging under dim golden lights. They ordered drinks, gin for Beverly, red wine for Lillian, and settled into a velvet booth against the far wall. "Tonight would have been your anniversary," Beverly said gently. Lillian swirled the wine, watched the garnet swirl and settle. "He always wanted live jazz at our wedding. I told him I wasn't walking down the aisle to a trumpet." "You would have been late anyway," Beverly teased. Lillian leaned back, listening to the upright bass rumble through the floorboards. "You know," she said after a pause, "he'd have loved how I handled it." Beverly nodded. "I think he saw more of it coming than he let on." "To what comes next?" Lillian said as the night drew to a close. A small stage light turned on near the back corner. The crowd hushed. A familiar figure walked to the piano, Maxine. Her silhouette was unmistakable. Even from behind, she winked at Lillian before motioning her forward. Lillian hesitated only a moment, then stood. She took her seat at the piano, same posture as that video months ago, and placed her fingers on the keys. Her piece was untitled. It didn't need one. She played not for grief, not for legacy, but because she could. The final note hung in the air like a closing door.